morning, Faith Family, and welcome to this Thursday edition of the Daily Connection, a time when we get together to get into the Word. More importantly, we get the Word into us. So we're still looking at this topic of God's purpose for people. And today really speaks to God in terms of being sovereign, Him having a predetermined plan, working out that plan. And it's a beautiful verse that some cases might cause people a little bit of consternation, but honestly, it should comfort us to know that what we see going on around us, at times it may seem chaotic, it may seem just totally out of control, but the fact of the matter is God is working out His plan and His purpose for His glory and honor, which is exactly what the writer is saying here. And Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 14, I know that everything God does will last forever. There's no adding to it. There's no taking from it. God works so that people will be in awe of Him. Whatever is has already been, and whatever will be already is. However, God seeks justice for the persecuted. So verse 14, as I said earlier, is alluding to the sovereignty of God in that He has a predetermined plan, that He's working out that plan. It goes right along with what we see in the idea of God in creation, intentioning everything for a purpose, especially man, placing man, positioning man, granting man this beautiful, serene garden that's called Eden, and more importantly, granting him free access, enjoying relationship with Him. And so here, Solomon, the writer says, I know that everything God does will last forever. There's no adding to it. There's no taking from it. And so that, in one sense, many scholars say, well, that just about takes the whole purpose of life out of the equation, but nothing can be further from the truth. What that does is that assures us that the purpose given to us fits in God's full intended purpose, because we're trapped within this thing we call time. We're captive to time. We operate within a certain realm of time in terms of a 24-hour day. We operate in terms of a year, a solar cycle of a year. We operate in the realm of a lifespan. Now, granted, that's shorter for some, longer for some, but in whatever degree you want to think of it, we're forced to operate within time, which means that regardless of how far we look back in history, we're still restricted by time. And of course, we're very limited in terms of what we can know in future reference of time. But God's not that. God doesn't operate within time as we think. God operates strictly within His nature and character, and all of that being worked out in His purpose. And so Solomon is saying here that God has a perfect plan that He's working out. We can't add to it. We can't take from it. But yet He allows us to play a part in it. And why? Well, it says it. So that man will be in awe of Him, or so that people will be in awe of Him. Some translations say fear. There's not a conflict here, because the whole idea is the biblical concept of fear. Not fear is in terms of trembling and shrinking back from, but fear in terms of worshiping, fear in terms of being reverent and having a reverential awe of. Basically, it's the idea so that man will worship Him, so that man will trust Him. And that's really the root of this, is that if God is sovereign, and that His plan is established and His plan is purposed, and nothing can change that, then we should find comfort in that, because He's a good God. James says He gives good gifts. Every good and perfect gift comes down from Him. And so that idea should bring us comfort. And then he comes to the verse 15. What is already has been. And so if we let history teach us lessons, we see cycles. We see seasons. It kind of goes back to what he said at the start of this chapter. Remember, there's a time for everything under the sun. Time to live, time to die. All those are cycles that he say. We see it repeated all throughout history. It'll continue to be repeated as long as time perpetuates. And so he says, hey, whatever's been will be, and whatever will be has already been. So it's here. It's now. We know it. We see it. We experience it within God's sovereign plan. And then we end on, a little bit of a different transition, but to me it's a transitional statement, getting us into what he's going to talk about in verses 16 and following. He says, however, God seeks justice for the persecuted. One of my writers I was looking at says this is this is the writer's way of letting us know that God is not ignoring evil. God is not turning a blind eye to mistreatment and things like that, because as we look through history, clearly we see injustice. Clearly we see people being mistreated. Clearly we see people, things happening that shouldn't happen, that aren't moral, that aren't ethical, that's not right by even, by God's standard. And so, here is a bit of a transition statement, and it's also an affirmation statement that's saying, hey, within that plan, we do see the reality of sin. Yes, we do. But we also know that God in his nature and God by his character and according to his purpose will rectify that. He will bring that to a loving resolve. And so we can find courage in that as well. And so I hope today encourages you to know that God has a plan. And yes, praise God, he is allowing us to participate in that. He is taking us and incorporating us into that plan, but it doesn't rise and fall on us. That doesn't give us an excuse to ignore God. It doesn't give us an excuse to live in disobedience to God's will. That's not what that means. What that does mean is this, that we should seek to be a part of that plan and delight in fulfilling that plan, surely out of the fact that it brings joy to the heart of our Father, not out of this idea that it all rises and falls on us. That's just not biblical. What it does is it reminds us that as the sovereign God, he is working all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So let this bring comfort to you today as you prepare to go out and finish this work week strong. And no matter where you're going, if you're going to school, if you're going to work, if you're going to enjoy recreation, doesn't matter. As you head out that door, as always, remember, live sent.